Philosophy 103 E, September 18th, 2017. No classes Wednesday through Friday because of the Jewish high holy days. So the next time we meet will be a week from today, which will be the 25th, and then again on the 27th. It was pointed out to me in my first class that a draft of the first essay is due on the 27th. And since the essay is about the Apology and the Credo, and we haven't talked about the Credo, I think it would be better for me to say a few words about the essay at the end of this class. So I asked a student in the first class to remind me to try and save 10 minutes at the end of class. And it was about 7 minutes before the end of the class, and I remembered, and she hadn't, and I said, "You didn't remember?" And she said, "Class ends at 11:50, right?" I said, "No, 11:40, because we don't take a 10-minute break." So it just goes to show you how many different ways it is possible to commit errors and make mistakes and get things wrong and so on. So I'm asking you to remind me this class ends at 1:40, at 1:30, to stop whatever I'm doing, which may not be easy because I would have been working for an hour to get to that point, maybe, possibly. Sometimes it's, it's just getting there. Anyway, to take some time to talk about the essay. Now, keep in mind, you should, between now and next Monday, work on that draft, and it's only a draft. You'll get to work on it again after I return the draft to you, but you'll get on Monday the 25th, we'll talk about some of these things again, so you'll have 2 more days before the draft is due. Also, let me say this now. The essays are not to be handed to me like the logs, but to be sent to me as an email attachment. All right? Now, so first point, not as an email message, but as an attachment. Okay? And so let me use an actual name. Here we've got O.G. Voltaire. Okay, so no. This is how I want you to name the document. If you don't name it that way, I can rename it, but the more you do that I don't have to correct, the less time for my clerical duties. Okay, so your last name, comma, first initial, SA1 draft. And okay, that's how I want you to name the document so that I can save it that way in my computer. And so what will happen is I'll read it in the computer and use the review techniques in Word, where I can write comments in between your sentences or even in between your words and in the margin all over the place. The average essay gets back from me at least a dozen comments on it. Okay, so whether they're helpful or not, you'll have to judge for yourself, but they're meant to be. And then you'll get it back to me. It's due on the 27th. You'll get it back to me a week from then, and then you'll do it again within a week. And you can see why we only do that for the first essay, because we'd run out of semester time, and you probably don't want to spend January with this course too, even though you find it wonderful and exciting. It might mess with your skiing trip or something. So anyway, so that's I'll say more about the content after we've had some discussion. So I've now read logs by you on Euthyphro and apology. 2 on the apology, old accusers and new accusers. So I have a sense of what difficulties many of you, all of you have some difficulties you're having with the arguments. Sometimes with the particular arguments that are apart, and sometimes with the whole. And I want to remind you that I'm trying to get you to think about the outline of the whole dialogue, how it goes from the beginning to the end, and to have some sense of the steps involved in that. Because, not just as a piece of information that's interesting in itself, but also as a way of understanding the parts. When you have something that's organic, that means that the parts have a dependency on each other. They're not independent. The whole is not just a collection. It's an interrelationship. And when that's the case, you cannot understand the part unless you know something about its relationships to the other parts. So when I ask you to look for the outline of the argument in the whole dialogue, I'm doing so not just to make another demand on you, but so that you can understand how some of these arguments you've encountered in the parts, what their significance is in the whole. So to put that simply, in the apology, there are charges of 2 sorts, as you know. Both of which are defended against, Socrates defends himself against, rather briefly. Little longer for the new accusers than the old, but each part, each of the old and the new divides into 2 parts, defense against charges and then another question. And it's the other question that gets the space. So if you're going to understand what he's saying about the charges themselves, you have to understand why he thinks that the charges themselves are not the most important thing. But let me start with the Euthyphro because it starts a theme that is characteristic of Socrates. In the Apology, Socrates presents himself as a person who seeks the truth. One of the words he uses and that we use to refer to such a person and to refer to him is a philosopher. In other words, he's not just talking about something that he's done once or twice or many times. It's who he is. It's what he does all the time. In the Euthyphro, go back to our first encounter with Socrates. Socrates initially makes 2 points that should be familiar to you, that you've heard me talk about before. One is that he thinks that Euthyphro must know what piety is. And he thinks that because he's out of respect for Euthyphro on the one hand, and the fact that Euthyphro is pressing charges against his father on the other. In other words, Euthyphro is the kind of conscientious human being and also loving son that he would not expect to do something of such importance, with such great consequence, without great thought. and therefore he must know what impiety is. He wouldn't accuse his father of it unless he knew what it is. And that's one thought. And the other thought is, that tells us, both of these tell us who Socrates is. He thinks that if he can learn from Euthyphro what piety is, he will have a defense in his own trial where he's been accused of impiety. So what do you see how that tells us something about who Socrates is? It's not a real difficult point. What is Socrates saying that he thinks is important that would make a good defense? What, Mr. Alfred?
He believes that understanding piety is the key to understanding why he does what he does.
Right, so that's already too complicated. It's probably true, but what is it that Socrates thinks is important that you have with respect to something like piety and other subjects as well? What do you need? No, that's what that piety involves that. But what is Socrates always trying to get? Yeah, got it. What does he seek? What? The truth. And what does he? It's more than truth, though. Right answer, but more than. What does he want with respect to the truth? No.
Like we discussed last time, he wants to go beyond the common knowledge.
You're getting too complicated. I made a simple point, but obviously it's not. It's only simple if you. Maybe it's not so simple. Socrates makes 2 points to Euthyphro. One is that Euthyphro must what? 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 Mr. Dawkins? I didn't hear you. Repeat what I said? No, we got that already, that being done by the transcription. But how about answer what I said?
I think you wanted him to be in class, not to
What does he say Euthyphro must be the case with Euthyphro? What? What? Yes, he must know what piety is. Do you hear my emphasis? Know what piety is. That's first point. Second point, he wants, which follows from the first one, he wants Euthyphro to teach him so that he can know what piety is. What is it that Socrates thinks is important? Knowledge. That's what Plato is showing you. Socrates wanted knowledge. Okay? Now, in the Apology, we're going to come back to the Euthyphro, but I just want you to get the feel for this one point. In the Apology, he explains his life by telling a story about an oracle. According to Socrates, and his friend went to this oracle, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but it's simple enough. What did Socrates take the oracle to be telling him? What did Socrates do after he heard about the oracle? Not the smartest. Yes, good, Mr. Dawkins. Now, what did he do when he heard that? Okay. Voltaire, then? Why? But notice the problem. It's a good answer, Mr. Voltaire, but this is very instructive for all the things you write. When I ask you a question and you give an answer, for it to be a good answer, the connection between the answer and the question has to be made explicit. I asked you after he hears the oracle, what does he do? And you told me what he does. But you didn't show me what that's got to do with the oracle. Since I'm giving Mr. Voltaire a hard time, let's give him a chance to get back if he thinks of something right away. Otherwise, he can do it later. Remind me of your name. Okada.
You wanted to sing what about them? Anything wise?
You're not telling me about the oracle.
Because they
You're doing the same thing Mr. Voltaire did, which is good. You show that you understand what he was doing, yes, but what has it got to do with the oracle?
the oracle said that he's the wisest
Mhm.
person, right? So what made him wise is that he knows that he knows nothing.
No, you just gave the answer to the whole thing and before you even asked the question. It's as if I was to open my mouth and say, I'm going to ask you a question, and then you were to say to me, the answer is yes. I say, how do you know the answer is yes? You don't even know what the question is. Oh, but I always want to say yes to you, you might say. Oh, yeah, but in this case, what I want is a no. All right? When Socrates hears the oracle, why doesn't he just say, woohoo? That's a very good answer. What are you having your breakfast? Is that breakfast or lunch? Breakfast. What is it? Chicken and rice? Is that the kind of breakfast you usually have? Yeah. I know this is none of my business. And what? And tea. Thank you. Just in case I wanted to know the drink. Okay, we got that taken care of. It's a very good answer, except that it's not quite right, because if Socrates didn't believe the oracle, that would mean that Socrates thinks that the god Apollo is a source of untruth. And that would not be a nice thing to say about the god, right? Maybe it's true. I mean, I don't know, but Socrates claims to be pious. So I doubt that he would say that what the oracle said is untrue. But it's close to the right answer. No, he didn't. I know that's not an unreasonable way to describe what he did. But look, do we human beings know the truth? Do we have the truth? Are we in possession of all the truth? We know everything? No. So what do we have to do to acquire the truth? What? Research. Yeah, that's a modern word we use. What does Socrates do? But what does he do? He talks to other people. That wouldn't be a bad answer even today, right? In your research, when scientists do research, don't they always tell you first what the state of the field is on this particular subject, the research that other people have done and so on? So the first thing they do is talk to other people. And then when they get through with their research, they submit it for publication, right? They submit it to the public, or at least that part of the public that knows about these things, and see what the others say. So even now, although we think that experiments and so on, observation of nature, all that stuff, even now we include talking to other people as a significant part. And what Socrates is showing you is that what he does is talk to people and ask them questions, especially people who claim to know something. Because if you ask somebody a question who says he doesn't know anything about it, where does that get you? Right? So somebody thinks he knows something, you ask him a question. Now, nasty and erroneous ways, I think, of interpreting Socrates would be to say, well, he asks people questions in order to show they don't know anything. See, that's nasty, isn't it? Try to show that somebody is full of baloney. Right? I cleaned that one up just in the nick of time. But the person might be full of baloney. Right? So suppose that Socrates asked somebody a question. The person thought he knows something, but actually he's full of baloney. Has Socrates done something nasty? No. If you think you know the way to get somewhere, and you take your idea includes using the wrong train on the subway or something like that, and somebody corrects you, is he hurting you or benefiting you? He's benefiting you, right? Okay. Now, however, with directions like that, people are not usually, upset when you correct them. They're probably appreciative. But with a lot of things where our beliefs involve things that are important to us, our values and so on, the people questioning them might feel nasty to us, might not feel like they're trying to be helpful. So what Socrates tells you he did in response to the oracle was to ask people questions, people who claim to know. Now, if he's doing it in response to the oracle, he's got to have some negative relationship to the oracle. And what I mean by that, not necessarily that he's putting the oracle down. It doesn't have to be a negative relation of disbelief, however. But there's got to be some negative there. That is to say, something that has to be remedied. That's what action is for, right? You say, why? If I say to Mr. Dawkins, why are you eating that chicken and rice, which, by the way, smells pretty good. It must be close to my lunchtime. What could he tell me? He's hungry, right? And if somebody didn't understand what that's about, you could say, well, the human body and, nourishment and, right? Okay. So, but you're taking action in order to deal with some problem, some negative situation. If Socrates heard the oracle saying, hey, man, you're number one, he could have just celebrated, right? Yay! But he didn't. And Mr. Dawkins is pretty close to the truth when he says that Socrates didn't believe it. But Socrates would never say that. He would say, just as he said about Euthyphro, but with more justification in his mind about the oracle, it must be true. The oracle said it. It must be true. He identifies the God with truth. Period. But what's the problem then, if what the oracle tells him is true? Mr. Alfred.
He wants to see why he's the wisest.
But why is there even any question? What is it that he has to see? You were telling me that before, actually. Sandra? Yes! How did I get to be number one? I don't know a damn thing. It's like telling me that I'm the tallest member of the faculty. I would say, what? Are you serious? And I'd have to start looking at my colleagues and discover whether some of them are walking around on stilts or something, right? To make sense of that. If I was sure that what you were telling me is true, and yet my experience is so contrary. Now, you see how close that is to what Mr. Dawkins said. It's as if he doesn't believe it, except that because it comes from the oracle. It's something you might say to a good friend even. No friend is a god, but still, there are friends we have confidence in. So we say sometimes to our friends, if anybody else had told me that, I wouldn't have believed it, we say, right? But you, I believe. Why? Because I know that you don't make up stuff like that. We have confidence in people. His confidence in the God is complete. That's how Plato's presenting him. You might say, I don't believe that Socrates was really like that. Maybe you're right, but I'm talking about how Plato presents Socrates in this dialogue. He's a guy who says, the God said it, I believe it, but I don't understand it. Now, being in a position of not understanding things is the human condition. Okay? So Socrates is talking about something that's not unusual. Lack of understanding. You can identify the truth with God, or you can identify the truth with nature or whatever. The fact is, there's certainly a lot of it we don't know. But Socrates, you're not allowed to hedge your bets. Some of you write in your logs, Socrates says, I hardly know anything. No, that's not what he said. He said he knows nothing. And we have to come to terms with that, but I'm not going to do that just yet. So he talks to people in order to find out if they know anything. And he discovers that they don't. So this is the shocking. Socrates tells this story as if it's a straightforward, easy story. right? The oracle told him something. He went out and questioned people, and he found out. But what he found out is not something that we can just listen to and say, oh, yeah, right, okay. He found, by the time he's finished with these, or he's never finished, but after a while, he claims that the situation is that nobody knows anything. No human being knows anything. What about the God? Everything. So that's the situation. That's part of the point that he's making is now, if the situation is human no knowledge, then how can a human be wise as the God says? Because the God says, and the God knows everything, right? That's, at least we're talking about Socrates' assumptions. God knows everything, says that Socrates is wisest. So it must be true. So how could Socrates be wisest if he knows nothing? Right. Humility is certainly part of it, but he somehow recognizes, he knows something. This is the paradox of what he says. He says that he knows only one thing, that he knows nothing. Now those, on a literal level, those two statements contradict each other. Knows something, knows nothing. Knows that he knows nothing is a self-contradictory statement. However, if you take the statement as true, it means it goes around and around. He knows something, which is that he knows nothing. But he knows that he knows nothing. So the difference between Socrates and other human beings, and he doesn't say every other human being, because at a certain point he says, I understood finally what the oracle was saying, what the God was saying to me. It wasn't talking about Socrates, he says. It was talking about people who, like me, recognize that they know nothing. Okay. Now, the point that I started out making, I'm going to come back to that one now, but I want to remind you of the context. I was saying to you, the charges he doesn't pay much attention to. And the explanation for him not paying attention to them is that these charges are made by people who don't understand, so the charges are not very interesting, and who are motivated, that is to say, they're making the charges not because they care about these things, education, piety, whatever, but because they are part of the group of people who found what he was doing to be painful and they think wrong. So the real issue is not the charges, but what was it that he was doing? And is it justifiable or not? So when he dismisses the charges, he places a greater charge against himself. He says, how can you justify what you were doing? In order for us to justify what Socrates was doing, we have to ask ourselves what the possible benefit could be of somebody who goes around asking people questions in order to determine whether any of them is wiser than he, since he knows nothing, and the only way that he could be wise is if it turns out that they know nothing too. So the outcome of this, to use a word that Mr. Salimi used before, or Mr. Miradel, I can't remember which one, research, right? The outcome of this research is on the literal level empty. Zero. Nobody knows anything. Okay? So we have to ask ourselves, what could the benefit of this be? If Socrates is trying to meet the charges ultimately by saying, no, the charges don't matter. What matters is what I was doing. So now he describes what he was doing, and it looks like what he was doing is pointless. Now you found out nobody knows anything. What use is that? All right. Now, let's go back to the Euthyphro for a moment. He says Euthyphro must know what piety is, otherwise he wouldn't be charging his father. So he asks Euthyphro, tell me, because I need to know what piety is. So Euthyphro tells him, piety is doing what I'm doing. And what he's referring to is charging his father. Well, yeah, but how do you know that charging your father is piety and is a good thing? Oh, well, because there are stories of Zeus doing the same thing. Zeus charged his father. Okay, so Euthyphro is doing the same kind of thing that the stories say that Zeus did. Now, Socrates says he doesn't believe those stories. And that's important because if we knew that the stories were true, even if we didn't understand why they are stories of piety, we would at least have a rule that we could follow. We'd say, okay, I don't know why this is a good thing, but I do know that the God did this, and I'm in the same situation, so I'll do the same thing. I don't know why it's a good thing to do, but it's, I have belief that the God knows. All right, so I could follow it. But if we don't know that the stories are true, then we cannot use them as certain models to follow. And they do not tell us, whether they're true or not, they do not tell us what piety is. Why not? If you have 3 different triangles and you identify them all as triangles, so you have 3 examples of triangles, why is that not a definition of a triangle? Mr. Alfred?
In the context of argument between Euthyphro and Socrates.
You don't want to tell me about triangles?
I mean,
Yeah.
About the triangles, it's that it gives you an idea what triangles look like, but it doesn't give you a distinct definition that you could apply to other.
Do you know that that's what triangles look like?
Yes, by observing or
How can you know what triangles look like if you don't know what a triangle is?
by drawing, like, basically.
But you do know what a triangle is, don't you? But the question is, do you find out what a triangle is by being told that these 3 are triangles? So what is a triangle?
A triangle is a 3-sided closed figure.
Yeah, closed is what figure means, right? So, but if you say plane, that would be helpful because it makes it 2-dimensional. But all right, 3-sided figure, okay? Mr. Salimi, you wanted to say something about this? I want to know if we think that this is a triangle and this is a triangle and this is a triangle, are we right? Is that true? Of course, they're poorly drawn, but you know what I mean. Right? Okay, so it's true. So we're right that those are 3 triangles. Does that mean we know what a triangle is? Well, what is a triangle? Say it again. 3-sided plane figure, right. But I didn't say that this is a 3-sided plane figure. If I did, I would not only be telling you that this is a triangle, I would be telling you what a triangle is. Right? So when I tell you what a triangle is, now I can tell you why each of these is a triangle. Now, even when I didn't tell you what a triangle is, and I said each of those is a triangle, I was right, but I was not giving a definition, and therefore I was not giving knowledge. Because you need the definition you need to know what a triangle is in order to know that those are triangles. And, for example, that isn't. So if you said, no, that's not a triangle, why not? You have to be able to say, because it's got 4 sides, not 3. So it's the definition that tells you what the thing is. And if you know that the definition is right, then you can know that everything that fits the definition is that kind of thing and everything that doesn't isn't. Before that, you might have belief, but not knowledge. That's the distinction that Socrates is making. And your beliefs can be true, even when you don't have knowledge. If that weren't the case, then human beings and other sentient creatures, dogs and monkeys and everything, wouldn't be able to live. We make up our minds about stuff. When Mr. Dawkins got his lunch and I got my water, we did not run chemical tests to make sure that they were free of impurities that could make us sick or even kill us. But what did we do? How do you avoid impurities in your food? Do you run chemical tests every time you have a meal? No, because usually the test must probably take days, so you'd be eating stale food all the time. So what do? Well, if you have reliable people, your mother or your some store, person you have confidence in. But but that just passes the buck. So what do? Do they run chemical tests? Does your mother run a chemical test every time she feeds you? No. What? So, right, okay. So you get some indication of freshness based on what idea? What's the idea of freshness? What is freshness? Why do we think it's good if it's fresh? Why don't we think it's good if it sits around for clean? What does clean mean? No, that's the effect. What does clean mean? Clean means it doesn't have what? Yeah, bacteria. So we have a theory of bacteria in mind, which wasn't always the way people thought about these things. There was a time of 150 years ago or so when people like Pasteur had made the discovery of bacteria that surgeons did not wash their hands before surgery, or after for that matter, unless they got really messy, right? And when they were told initially that they should wash their hands so their patients didn't die, and because there were these invisible little things, they thought it was a ridiculous, funny little things that you can't see. Sounds like a made-up story. Except it turns out those little things do exist, right? So you've got this theory about bacteria, and the theory includes the idea that it takes time for bacteria to grow. And most bacteria are harmless unless it becomes sufficiently, enough of them that they begin to be able to do things in your body. Of course, some bacteria are more harmful than others, all right? So that's your theory. And does that enable you to know if, in fact, there are deadly bacteria on that food? This example is okay because Mr. Dawkins finished. If I was talking like this while he was eating, it would be not nice, right? Do you know? Do you know that there's no deadly bacteria when you eat food? No, you don't know. What you have is a kind of probability. If it's fresh, it's unlikely to be harmful to you. But we hear stories all the time, right, about restaurants and salad bars and so on. People have a nice salad and then keel over. Fortunately, it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. So what I'm illustrating is that in life we make decisions based on beliefs that have some degree of probability. It's not that the beliefs come out of the blue. They're based on our experience, and experience is a good guide in life, but it is by no means an infallible guide. Right? Human beings, think of how unreliable we are. We think, well, if you get to know somebody, you learn whether you can trust them or not. And that works out pretty well for the most part. But some people, seem to be trustworthy who are not. So we lack knowledge. Now, Socrates is arguing for seeking knowledge. He says it's very important. But he's not talking about knowledge so that you can be sure that what you're doing in some cases is going to work out the way you want to. He's arguing for knowledge that is seeking knowledge that will give you an understanding of what's good and what's not. And therefore, his discussions are always about things like piety, justice, and so on. Just as you can't know that this is a triangle, you might believe it, you might think it, but you can't know it unless you know what a triangle is. Similarly, you cannot know that this is unjust or this is just unless you know what justice is. And Euthyphro cannot know whether his act of charging his father is an act of piety or not unless he knows what piety is. So he thinks that human beings should spend time thinking about these things in order to acquire that knowledge and in order to have truth and knowledge in their minds rather than falsehood and belief. Now, let's come back to the idea that he knows nothing. The idea that he knows nothing and that other people know nothing suggests, well, if you show somebody who thinks that he knows something, that he's wrong, that he doesn't know it, which is what Socrates frequently did, right? And what a lot of people found, some people found very annoying. If you show somebody that he doesn't know what he thinks he knows, you're doing him a benefit because what? What does he know? Knows that he doesn't know. Now, how is that a benefit? What's the benefit? Yeah. If you think you know something, you don't have to think about it. If you're shown that you don't know it, that gives you the opportunity to think about it some more. Now, thinking about it some more doesn't guarantee you're going to get knowledge, but at least it gives you a chance, right? So people who think they know are benefited by questioning from Socrates or somebody else, or from themselves even, because if they discover that they really don't know, that there's some problems with what they think, they can try to get a better understanding. But if you think you know, you won't try to get a better understanding. Now, what's the point of saying, though, that nobody knows anything? If nobody knows anything, does that mean that you cannot benefit yourself by thinking more? Because if you think more about it, what the benefit that you're looking for is to get some knowledge, get some understanding. Now, how can we put those two together? The idea that we should think more and the idea that we can never have knowledge. Because the benefit of thinking more is to get knowledge. Tough, right? However, if we look at these discussions, do we actually find Socrates saying that everybody knows nothing and that's all there is to it? Who knows more about piety, Socrates or Euthyphro? You're not sure? Well, does Euthyphro know what a definition of piety is? No. Socrates teaches him that, right? The way you know that this is a triangle is by recognizing what these three have in common that make them triangles, right? It's not their differences, the difference of shape and size and so on. It's what they have in common. They are all three-sided figures, right? Three-sided plane figures. Euthyphro talks about stories that are stories about piety, but that never say what they all have in common that makes them all about piety. Socrates teaches him that if you're going to have knowledge of piety, you have to know what it is. Knowing what it is means what those stories all have in common. And so Euthyphro tries to do that, and he gives an answer, what they all have in common, which is a definition, but turns out to be a false definition. Because what follows from his definition, which is that the gods, piety is what the gods love, because it's polytheistic religion and the gods are constantly fighting with each other and disagreeing about things like piety and justice and so on. That means that if you use that definition, that means that anything that you do is both pious and impious. So it's self-contradictory. It's both a triangle and not a triangle. All right? So by teaching him that, Socrates has increased his understanding. He's looking for the things that the various stories have in common that makes them stories of piety. He's increasing his understanding, and if he's increasing his understanding, then that tells us that Socrates knows more about piety than Euthyphro does. Same thing is true in the Apology, isn't it? So, if by comparison with Euthyphro and others, Socrates actually knows more than they do, if we take the evidence of the dialogues you've read, what comparison would make it true to say that he knows nothing? It's by comparison with God. That's right. So, I have to throw this away because it's actually dead and I keep using it. Those are three categories that exhaust quantity. You're talking in terms of quantity. The quantity can be nothing, no quantity, or it could be something, some quantity, or it could be all. And some is anything from one to anything less than all, right? In the case of numbers, if you're doing quantification in terms of numbers, it's kind of hard to talk about all, right? Why? What? Yeah, there's no biggest number, right? Now, there are ways of talking about all numbers, even though you can't count them all and get the highest number, okay? But, so these are the concepts that Socrates' riddle is about. It's a riddle, just as the God gave a riddle. Socrates is the wisest. He says, oh, I'm the wisest? I know nothing. So that's the riddle. But what Socrates is showing you when he says that he knows nothing is that he compares his knowledge to the knowledge of the God. Now let's suppose that he has some knowledge, which seems to be, that's not what he says he has none. But what we seem to see from watching him in these dialogues is that he has some knowledge, and that it's more than other people. There may be other people who know more than he does, we don't know, but certainly from the ones we've seen, he knows more. So let's suppose he has some knowledge. If you compare it to other people, it's some knowledge. For example, he knows when he doesn't know. And that's some knowledge that other people don't always have because they think they know and they're mistaken, all right? But it may be more than that. But what is it that makes it no knowledge? And the answer, I think, is when he compares it to the God. And the reason that it's no knowledge compared to the God is because when you have some knowledge but you lack other knowledge, you are lacking knowledge of the place that the some knowledge you have has in the whole, because you lack knowledge of the whole. And therefore, your knowledge has a certain deficiency to it. Okay, this is a difficult concept. But I think that what Socrates is saying is, if we compare ourselves to the gods, that is to say, to the whole truth, what we recognize is two things. One, that it is beneficial to pursue truth. That is, we can learn. We human beings can learn. We can get more than we've got. Otherwise, there'd be no point to it. And two, that we will never finish. We'll never get knowledge such that we can say, that's it, no more questions. That is for the God, not us. So we are always in the position as human beings of seeking, never completely having. Right? Now, in monotheistic religions, sometimes this takes the form of concepts like grace. Right? Grace means thanks. Right? That in order for you to get completeness, you need God's help. Human beings can never do it on their own. Okay. Now, any questions about that? I mean, it's a tricky business. So let's talk about the Credo. Again, what I want to emphasize is finding the argument, finding the organization of ideas in the Credo that gets the whole thing. What's the problem that the Credo poses for us to think about? What does Credo want? What, Mr. Alvarez? Yes. So Credo, so on one level it's very simple, right? Credo has bribed the guard and made arrangements in Thessaly for Socrates to leave, and nobody, the Athenians, most of them were not eager to kill Socrates. They would have been happy if Socrates had agreed to keep his mouth shut, for example. I'm talking about those who were accusing, I'm not talking about the ones who loved him, would have been happy if he'd agreed to keep his mouth shut. What did he say in the apology about this? This, by the way, is about the essay, so I just want to alert you. What did he say in the apology to the idea of, sometimes we have a court case where the defendant is asked to promise that he's going to not do that stuff anymore, and if he agrees to that, that's part of the deal. Okay, you can go, but you're on probation or whatever, right? What would Socrates say if the court said to him, we're going to let you go, Socrates, but no more philosophy. We don't want you going around asking people questions. Okay? What yes, Mr. Voltaire? Right. He'd say no. Why? By what authority would he continue? Well, when sometimes there's always an authority involved in our actions. The authority might just be ourselves. So somebody asks why you're doing it. You might say, because I want to. And I regard my wants as authoritative, at least to a certain extent. There may be other higher considerations sometimes too, but they carry weight, they carry authority, what I want, right? So Socrates could be saying, no, I like doing it. You tell me not to do it, I'm going to do it anyway. I like it. I have a good time. That's one possible authority. But what has he told us is the authority for his, ask Mr. Coronado? Yeah, he was obeying the commandment of the God and doing the work of the God. And so here we have a law of Athens, and he's saying that's in contradiction to the command or commandments or laws of God. And so one authority is higher than the other in his judgment. Therefore, he would obey the God. It's not that he wants to ignore Athenian authority and laws, but not when they contradict the God. So in the Crito, and this is what the essay is about, in the Crito, he says he shouldn't break Athenian law, and therefore he shouldn't leave. But before we get to that conclusion, I want us to get some understanding of the outline of the Crito. So the first step was, Crito says, let's leave. And most people in that situation would be thrilled, the same way maybe we would have been thrilled if we were told that we're the wisest. You know, even if we had some doubts about whether we were wiser than other people, we would say, oh, that's wonderful that I should be given such a compliment by the priestess at Delphi. And now most of us would say, oh, I've been so worried, I thought I'm going to be dead in 2 days. Right? Now I'm free. Thank you, Crito. Oh, Crito, you've been such a good friend all my life. This is really wonderful. And we would go. We say, oh, wait, let me just get my toothbrush and get out of here. I don't know if the Greeks used toothbrushes. They must have used something. Anyway, not a major point, right? Okay, so here's what he says to Crito that should make immediately good sense to you. Crito is rushing him, saying, let's go. Why? Because he wants to get out of there before anybody, who might stop them, notices them leaving, and he wants to avoid this impending doom, this death that's going to come to Socrates in a couple of days. Time is important. He's in a hurry. Socrates speaks against that rush by saying, all my life, and much of yours, Crito, we have talked about these things, about what's the right thing to do, to be pious or just, right? And we have come to some answers. Notice how that too differs from what he said in the Apology, where where the Apology is stressing that he knows nothing. He's talking in the Crito as if they had accomplished something. Now that doesn't mean he now thinks he's a god, but he says, unless we can come up with something different now, we shouldn't change our minds just because we're afraid of death. And he compares them to, if they did so, they would be like children who get afraid in the dark. They would be like children. In other words, it would make his life's work into something silly like a child's game, which is not to be taken seriously, because when it comes right down to it, when he's facing death, it amounts to nothing. All right? So he's making an argument to Crito as to why they should remind themselves what they have agreed to in the past. That's step one. And then step two is to apply it to this situation. He's not assuming the answer. He's saying, let's see, what did we agree to about this stuff, and let's see what it tells us to do in this situation. So to put it in general terms, you've got just as we were talking before with Euthyphro about examples, stories, and definitions that help you to understand those stories, here we're talking about a situation that calls for action, a case. And what's our theory? Our theory being what we had agreed to in the past is the truth to the best of our ability to understand these things. And so what he reminds him they had agreed to in the past was this very important distinction that I have sort of scribbled here with a line like that shows a higher and a lower. That life isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is how you live it. So it's not a matter of staying alive, having the greatest number of years. It's a matter of not the quantity, but we could say the quality. And that justice is a good life. Now, let me try to clarify what that means. These are points that are made at great length in a dialogue called The Republic. And in the past, for many years, I used The Republic in this course. And then this past couple of semesters, I decided, no, let me do something more traditional. That is to say, it's typical for introductions to philosophy to use the Apology and these other dialogues, but especially the Apology, because the Apology is the introduction to Socrates, and Socrates is the guy who sort of models philosophy, life devoted to philosophy. So it's a good introduction to philosophy. Even though other philosophers might disagree with Socrates and so on. And they do. So in the Republic, Socrates compares two different ideas about life with respect to justice. Again, the more common one, the one that would be held by people who would be only too happy to escape from jail and live somewhere else in exile. That is probably most people. In that way of thinking about justice, the worst thing that could happen to a person is injustice. That is to say, if somebody does an injustice to you, you are harmed. Somebody injures you bodily or kills you or kills a loved one or something like that, or takes your money or whatever. These are all, in varying degrees, terrible things to happen to a person. And Socrates would not disagree with that. But he doesn't think that they're the worst things. In the standard model, so to speak, it's suffering injustice, having it done to you, that is worst. In Socrates' conception, having justice done to you is bad, but not worst. The worst thing is doing it. Because doing it makes you unjust, and being unjust means that your soul, your mind, whatever you want to call it, has become bad. Your life has become bad. You've become bad. It's not just something bad happened to you. You are bad. Right? So that means that the best thing in the model where suffering injustice is the worst thing, the best thing often means doing injustice and getting away with it, so that you become the boss or elected to office or wealthy or whatever. In other words, you achieve your goals, whether it involves injustice or not. And if it does involve injustice, you do it and you get away with it. In Socrates' model, the best thing is doing justice. The worst thing is suffering, is doing injustice, and suffering injustice is in between. It's bad. It's not that it's good, but it's not as bad as doing it, okay? So that's what he's reminding Crito of, and anybody who knows the Republic knows that they're referring to this. So you don't know the Republic, I assume. So I'm telling you a little bit just so you can at least get the idea. I'm not saying the ideas will be totally clear and comfortable, but I'm trying to give you some idea of what he's referring to. So if there's never a good reason to do injustice because that's the worst, right? And something that's not as bad as the worst has to be, the worst can never be a reason. Doing the worst thing can never be smart, right? Because it's the worst alternative. If there's any alternative at all, it's better than that. Including dying. This is what Socrates is saying, right? So, if that's true, now he's talked about the theory. This is the theory. This is what we've agreed to in the past. These are our ideas that we think are true. Now the question is, we like to take theories and apply them to facts, right? So let's apply it to this case to see what it tells us. Now, this is a case in which injustice has been done to Socrates. Socrates thinks so, and Crito thinks so, right? But who has done injustice to Socrates? Mr. Alfred?
Those that try to benefit and correct, but end up turning against him for it.
So in this case, who are they? I know the first part is hope. What's the second part? Tell me, I'm sorry. What? Campbell, right. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. The people who voted against him. In fact, in the apology, after the death sentence comes in, he addresses the two sets of judges, those who voted for him and those who voted against him, separately. To those who voted against him, first of all, to those who voted for him, he says, don't worry, we don't know that death is a bad thing. You're all upset, your friend Socrates is going to die, but we don't know that death is a bad thing. But to the ones who voted against him, he says, you are worse off than I am. Right? Why are they worse off than he? He uses the analogy of a swift runner catching somebody. The evil that's about to catch, that has already caught you. I'm being pursued by a very swift runner. What's the swift runner that's pursuing Socrates? What does that metaphor mean? No, something bad that's going to happen to him. Death. Yes. Why? How does it make sense, Miss Francis, right, to speak of death as fast? Well, is there anybody who outruns it? Get it? Even, maybe God willing, you'll live to 110 and be healthy the whole time. Actually, my people, the Jewish people, use the number 120. And of course, in the Bible, there were people who lived to 700 or so, but we're not sure how they were counting. But in any case, if you live 100 years or 700 years, the fact is we're mortal, right? We die. If you think of death as being caught by a runner, what that means is that runner catches us all and therefore is faster than all of us. And in that sense, death is fast. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen to you soon, but eventually you'll be caught. Okay, enough of that unpleasantness. What faster runner has caught the people who voted against him? Do you know, Ms. Hope Campbell? What bad thing has caught them? What was I asking you before? Who is, in this story, who is what? He and Socrates agreed to their theory. Now we're going to apply it to this case. We're looking for who is what? Unjust, right? Who has done something unjust? So the answer is the judges who voted against him, right? Now, what swift runner has caught them? Well, what's the evil that's caught them? Injustice, right? Not that injustice has been done to them, but injustice that they have done. Now, why call that a swift runner? Why is that even swifter than death? Because death takes a while, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, whatever it is. It takes a while to catch you. How long does it take injustice to catch you? The answer is it's instantaneous. Do you see why? The moment you make a bad choice, it has already corrupted your mind to some degree. It may not have turned you into some disgusting, awful thing, but it's made you worse, not better. Immediately. And so there, remember I was telling you this is in the Republic? It's in the apology. Right there, when he addresses the jurors. Okay? So now he says, okay, those jurors, those judges, they were unjust to me. But if I were to escape, as you suggest, Crito, I will be injuring not those judges, but what? What? The laws, yes. And that's why he has a make-believe dialogue between himself and the laws, as if the laws were people. Because he wants to dramatize this idea of injury. The laws say to him, look, Socrates, your parents wouldn't have been able to get married, have a baby, give it an education, so that you became smarty pants philosopher, right? Without us. It's like the African expression, what does it take to raise a baby? A village, and a village has laws. And laws are not just, we're not just talking about written down written laws like the speed limit and that kind of thing, but customs, the way the people live. Everything, including the religion and all their beliefs and values and so on. This is the environment in which people are raised, and if people have great accomplishments, they owe them, at least in part, to the village, the community in which they were raised, right? And now, is Socrates saying that the laws are perfect? You wouldn't think so. This is the guy who keeps saying we have to ask questions. So that's the answer to the essay. On the one hand, we have Socrates saying that if you passed a law that said no more philosophy, I would break that law. On the other hand, we have Socrates saying, I would rather die than break the law, because breaking the law would be committing injustice, and that would make my life a bad life, and would hurt my soul, and I'd rather die than do that. Okay? So how do you put those two together? Well, laws need two things to be good. They need to be just, yes, they need to be good laws, but they also need to be obeyed. You can have wonderful laws that people ignore, and they're not worth a damn. Right? You have a speed limit. You say, hey, the speed limit here is 30. Yeah, but everybody's driving 50. Yeah, we don't pay any attention to the speed limit. What kind of law is that? Right? I just use speed limit as an example because it's so obvious, so clear, So how do you make laws better? If you assume that the laws can be improved, not necessarily every law all the time has to be changed, but we have to, How do you make them better? No, but how do you get better punishments, whatever it is about the law? And we change our minds about punishments, don't we? Right now, the country, well, at least until this presidential election, there was a big movement that apparently was supported by both Republicans and Democrats that we were putting too many people in jail for too long for very minor offenses, and we were doing more harm than good. To them and to us, the rest of us, right? So we change our minds about things like that. We learn from experience. But what we have to do in order to improve the laws is the same thing we have to do to improve our understanding of anything. We have to think, and we have to talk to each other. Isn't that what Socrates did? He would ask people what they think and question it. Okay? That's why he won't give that up. It's not just, and you don't have good laws if you have a law against questioning the laws. You have to question laws and obey them. Isn't that also what Dr. King said? Isn't that what nonviolent resistance was all about? We respect law, even though we don't. By the way, Dr. King, in Letter from Birmingham Jail, which was written to white ministers who said they were supporters of what Dr. King and others, it wasn't just Dr. King. There were lots of people in different groups, and they didn't all get along and everything, but a lot of people were working for these changes. These white ministers claimed to support these changes. But they also said that Dr. King, this is a common criticism made at the time, you're going too fast. So Dr. King's Letter from Birmingham Jail is about how, when you're standing on somebody else's foot, like on the subway, if by accident somebody steps on somebody's foot, who's in a hurry for the situation to change? The guy whose foot is on the bottom, right? Right. So, we waited a long time. It's hurting, So Dr. King expresses it much more nicely than that, but that's the sort of point he makes. But in the course of it, he says, we believe in law and obedience to law, except where law is unjust. And he said he defines an unjust law, and it's very similar to the kind of thing that Plato and Socrates are saying here. An unjust law, he says, is anything that diminishes human beings, makes them worse as human beings. And these segregation laws against use of public facilities and so on were obviously degrading and harmful to people. Okay? So, he won't break the laws because the way we might express it now is by saying he got due process. The laws were not at fault for what happened to him. What was at fault was the judges, the jurors. If it happened in this country, Socrates had a good attorney, there'd be an appeal. That wasn't part of their system. So the laws were not defective. And by breaking the laws, he would be injuring them. That's his argument. That's what the essay is about. I've actually finished 10 minutes before. So let me go back a little bit. Does anybody have any questions you want to ask now about the essay? As soon as you get home, you're going to have questions, but you won't have me anymore. So see if you can think of one now. There's a question. This stuff is all in the syllabus, but I'm happy to answer it now. It's 2 pages, but it's 2 pages single space, which is the equivalent of 4 pages. Double space, obviously, by simple arithmetic. 2 pages, single space, yeah. No. First of all, I don't want you to quote Plato or me or anybody else. I'm glad you reminded me of this kind of stuff. Some of you may be tempted to use sources from the internet or whatever, and I can tell you it's a big mistake. First of all, it's not allowed. I don't allow it. I don't even allow you to quote Plato, as I just said. I do not want you to quote Plato. If you think that Plato has said something that is right on target, exactly what you want to say at that point in your essay, then translate what he says into your own words. That just doesn't mean that all your words have to be different from his words. I mean, some of the words might be the same, like justice and the and a and person or whatever, right? It's the same language, but put it in your own words, express it in your own way. And if you want to show that this is supported, you can just put it in parentheses. You can give the Stephanus number. You know about the Stephanus numbers? Did I tell you about the Stephanus numbers? In the margins of most editions of Plato's works? So you can show where this statement is made, but you don't give me the statement. You just give me the reference in case I want to look and check. But you put it in your own words. Don't use anything from the internet, and I'm telling, because I'll give you an F, and then you'll have to come in and cry in my office if you want me to let you do it over again. You won't have to cry, but you'll at least have to admit it. And I'm telling you, I always can tell, because, professional authors don't write the way you write. It's not that you're terrible authors or terrible writers, but you just don't write like that. Okay? So don't do it, for your sake. An essay that is very confused but is trying to understand these things is worth a lot more than, right, okay? So, no, I don't care about it being standard style. So why is everybody in a hurry? You think you're going to get free time or something here? I'm not going to let you go before 22. You think you've been bored up till now? Wait till you hear this next 5 minutes. Of course, anybody can leave anytime you want to. That's your business. Okay. Well, any other questions about the essay? Because if you don't have any more questions about the essay for now, I'm going to go back to something I was talking about before. In the summary that I gave of the apology today, I didn't say much about the charges. But in the logs that I read, there was a lot of misunderstanding or limited understanding. And one comes to mind that I want to clarify for you. A number of people said to me something like this. Socrates said he couldn't be the only one who's corrupting all the youths. Because, how could he get around? How many people could he corrupt and so on? So there must be other people corrupting the youths. There is a point at which Socrates says he can't be the only one, but that's not his defense. If you defend, again, take speeding as an example. If you say, well, other people speed too, that's not going to get you off, is it? It just means they should get a ticket and pay a fine too. What Socrates presents here is an argument which, I'm going to write a word on the board, is an imputation. An argument that makes an imputation is an argument that says that the person making it's a refutation of somebody else's argument based on the idea that what the other person is doing shows that he doesn't care about what he's saying at all, but he has another motive. That's what Socrates shows about Meletus. Meletus says that Socrates is corrupting the youth. Socrates says, well, who improves the youth? Meletus takes him a while, like Euthyphro, to understand how to answer that question. But eventually he says, everybody but you. All the good citizens of Athens improve the youth. You, Socrates, is the only one that corrupts them. Now, Socrates says that answer shows that Meletus has given no thought whatsoever to the problem of improving the youth. And since he's given no thought to it, making charges about it has to have some other motive. The motive can't be his educational concerns because he doesn't have any. He hasn't paid any attention to education whatsoever. Now, how does that show? How does answering that all Athenians improve the youth show that he hasn't thought about it? Well, he makes the analogy with horse training, right? Did we talk about this before? No. Okay. Suddenly I had a deja vu feeling, but it was from my first class, not this one. All right, forget about horses. Let's talk about dogs. My son and daughter-in-law dog sit. They get strangers' dogs, and I don't know, they pay them $25 for the weekend or something to take care of dogs. They enjoy doing it. So yesterday, when I visited my son, my daughter-in-law wasn't there. She was visiting her friends. He had a poodle named Bobo. He met me at the at the subway station, and I took Bobo on the leash because I brought some stuff for him. He carried the stuff. And Bobo didn't know anything about walking with somebody on a leash. Bobo was an adorable poodle, about 30 pounds, supposedly a standard poodle, but very small for a standard poodle. And she was very sweet and nice and everything. She wanted to lick me all the time. But she didn't know how to walk. She's always going here, going there. I said, come on, Bobo, you don't know anything about walking. I didn't get mad at her, but I had to keep her under control. So when people have problems training dogs, what do? Yeah, you get a dog trainer, because dog trainers know how to train them. And they know how to do it in a nice way. You don't have to be cruel. But you do have to be firm sometimes. And you use positive reinforcement, right? You give them a little cookie or something when they do things right. It works with humans too. So by saying that everybody improves the youth, except Socrates, what Meletus is showing he doesn't recognize is that in order to make something better, you have to know what's better and how to get it. In other words, it's the same point you always want to make about Socrates. Socrates emphasizes knowledge and the seeking of knowledge. When he talks about his life, what the God told him to do, seek knowledge. That's Socrates. So Meletus has shown that's not his idea. These law-abiding Athenian citizens might be good people in many ways, but it hardly makes sense to say those who don't think about these things at all are better influence than those who do know about it. So that's the ad imputatum. In other words, by showing that Meletus hasn't thought about improving the youth, which is a phrase that we express by using the word education. He hasn't thought about it at all. It shows that his charges are without any basis. That's how that particular charge gets refuted. So what I want you to do, look, when I tell you to write logs, I tell you, I don't expect you to understand this stuff, but of course you'll never understand it if you're not trying at least a little bit initially to find the argument. How do the ideas reach a conclusion? And then where does that argument fit in the whole dialogue? That's what I want you to be looking for. All right, so now one last thing. No class Wednesday. We meet again on Monday. And your draft is due on the Wednesday after that, okay?